It is early January 2026. Welcome to the God 22 video. And this marks the second anniversary of this series, just coming up to that. And if I thought the first video had a provocative title with "Is God really good?", then maybe this one will take it further, as I've titled it "Existence is Overrated." I could have alternatively called it "Oblivion, Is It So Bad?", because that's the theme I want to explore this time around. So I've asked some pretty big questions and I've read out a lot of feedback from listeners, and they've got some big questions as well, such as, what is this place? How did we get here? Who or what are we? What created this place? What force or entity? To what end? What's the point of these life experiences and all the struggles and hardships that we go through? I mean, those are pretty big questions, but I think there's an overarching question which is very axiomatic, and it goes right to the heart of any of these others that we might choose to ask. And that question would be, what is the point of anything? That may sound very nihilistic, but another question might be, is nihilism so bad? What is the point of any kind of existence? This is a very difficult concept for any human mind to wrap itself around. Granted. Why is there anything? Why is there life? Why is there even a creative generative force that we would call God? Why does any of that have to be there? People will say that's a very bleak worldview. But is it really? I've spent a lot of time in this video series, and there are many other, researchers and commenters and video makers out there discussing similar themes. And we talk about the idea of a soul trap or a soul trick. We talk about the idea that some sort of demiurge, some sort of pretender usurper god who may have got its hands on original creation and twisted and distorted it into whatever this is. And we talk about the meaning of the struggles and the hardships we go through in life and the role that things like fear and trauma can play. And you get people making all kinds of excuses for that. They say, oh, our souls need to learn and evolve and grow, and that's why we have to go through these hardships, because we learn from them and we become stronger, and we have to go through these multiple reincarnated lives so that we improve step by step each go round, and then we take what we've accumulated, all that knowledge, back to source at the end of it all. But again, the question applies. What's the point of any of that? Why did any of that have to be in place? Because if there were always nothingness, if no kind of generative creative force had ever existed, there would of course be no creation. There'd be nothing, just a void. There wouldn't even be a void, because a void is the negation of something else, and if the something else wasn't there in the first place, there'd be nothing to negate. If there were no existence and never had been, all the horrible stuff that goes on in this world that we know about and stuff that we probably don't, all the fear, the pain, the suffering, the trauma, the hardships, the struggles, and then the death, none of that would exist. Just think of the pain and the suffering and the trauma that would never have had to have been experienced by living sentient beings if there were nothingness, if there'd always been nothingness, if nothing had ever existed. Naysayers, skeptics will present the flip side of that coin, and they'll say, but Mark, without existence, there'd be no love and no joy and no happiness and no peace and all these wonderful things. If there had never been anything, that stuff would never have been experienced by anything. Therefore, it would not be missed, because there would be nothing to miss and no one or nothing to miss it. And what if all the good stuff, we've discussed this as a theme before in this series, all the beautiful stuff we get in creation, the mountains, the lakes, the rivers, the valleys, the oceans, all this wonderful, majestic stuff. What if all of that is only there to help perpetuate the illusion that this place is in some way beautiful and worthwhile and designed for our benefit. Because there's way more horrific stuff that happens in this realm of creation than there is nice, good stuff. And the evil, dark, nasty stuff far outweighs any of the good stuff. And again, I would refer people back to a brilliant observation made by Eric Dubay in the chat that I had with him in 2024, where he said, if you think everything is in balance in nature in this world, then think about whether you would trade 1 minute of the most glorious, fantastic, ecstatic physical experience a human could ever have. And your idea of that might be sexual. It might be blissing out in meditation. It might be getting high on drugs. I don't know. Would you trade a minute of that for a minute of the most horrific torture that could ever be devised and played out on a human? No one would ever choose that deal, because the horrificness of the torture way outweighs the ecstasy of the pleasant experience by immeasurable odds. So things aren't in balance. And maybe the good stuff that we see and that we experience just helps to convince us that we're not in a nasty hell world, which is specifically devised to facilitate nasty things for us. And again, it reinforces this idea that beyond human sight, beyond what we can experience or know, there are entities that feed off of all the negative vibrations that go on here, all the loose energy, the expression of fear and pain and suffering in all its forms. So if there were oblivion, none of that would ever have had to have been experienced. What about the so-called natural world, the so-called animal kingdom? Untold billions. Well, it'd be beyond trillions of trillions. It'd be just an immeasurable number if you take it back to the beginning of all this, if there ever was a beginning. All these living sentient beings that have undergone horrific, painful, terrifying deaths at the hands of another living sentient being, just so that that living sentient being can continue on in its life. And then the chances are that living sentient being is going to end up being consumed by another living sentient being as a food source for it. I mean, if you stacked up the horror and the fear experienced by all these individuated units of consciousness, these animals, these living beings throughout history, just try and calculate the amount of negative energy that's been produced by that. If there had been nothing and none of these creatures had ever existed, all of that could have been avoided. And they would never have had to have gone through all of that. The idea of oblivion seems to terrify most people. And I really don't know why. I just don't get it. People like to think that when their physical bodies end and they leave them, their consciousness goes beyond, if they believe that's what happens. They like to think that somehow they're going to continue living or existing. For the most part, they would choose to believe that that's in some kind of blissful, glorious afterlife where all the pain and the fear and the suffering is gone. But for me, the concept of eternity is terrifying. And I know that when we get out of this apparent 3D physical realm, time and space as we experience it here doesn't exist. So it's not like you're going to be feeling that time grinding away. It's not like a month in blissful eternity is going to feel like a month on Earth. You're not going to be aware of the passage of time because there won't be any. But even so, why would you want to exist in any form when the alternative is not existing, not being self-aware in any way, and not missing anything. You're not missing out on the bliss if you don't exist to miss out on it. The benefit is that you're not missing out on the bad stuff either. So I just don't get it when people say, oh, I'm going to die someday, and the idea of not existing and going into oblivion terrifies me. Not me. For me, the most comforting idea in terms of what's going to happen to me, my consciousness, my soul, when I leave this body, is the possibility that I will cease to exist in any way. I'll know nothing. When my brain shuts down and my central nervous system shuts down, I will cease to be self-aware in any way whatsoever. And I just will not exist beyond that. Why is that so disturbing to people? That's comforting to me. Maybe that idea brings comfort to some people watching this, but how often do you ever hear it expressed? How often do you ever hear this overarching question asked? What is the point of anything? What is the point of existence? It's a brain scrambler for sure, because all we've ever known in these human forms is existence. We're aware of the fact that we're here and we came from somewhere. But why did any of it have to be in place in the first place? I remember thinking this when I was very little, when I was a young kid. Used to have to go to church because it was a Christian C of E school. And we learnt about God and Jesus. And we were told that God created us and created this world and everything in it. And I remember thinking, even back then, why does any of this have to be? Why was there a God? And where did God come from? Who created God then? If God created everything else? Where did that original creative generative force come from? That's way more terrifying for me, not having the answers to questions like that. Because we don't, do we? We are abandoned, spiritually stranded. One day in these lives, in early childhood, we become aware that we exist. We become self-aware as the consciousness kicks in. But we have no idea how we got here. No conception of where we came from. And there's no roadmap for us. People will claim that these religious texts, these holy books, give us the guidance that we need. But we've discussed this before, for every holy book you could present, somebody else will pop up and say, no, 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 don't read that. That doesn't have the answers. My religion over here has the answers. And then someone else will say, you're both wrong. You're both wrong. I've got all the answers. So who do you listen to? The truth is, we are all, by default, agnostics, meaning we don't know where we come from. We can't know. Again, people will say, I've had out-of-body experiences, I've done ayahuasca, DMT, whatever, and I've received all the answers. That is a personal, individual experience on the part of that person. Only that person has experienced that. So when they tell their story to anyone else, that anyone else has only got their word for it because they've not experienced that individual situation for themselves. So how can we be even sure that these people are right and have all the answers that we seek? We can't. The only truth is we know nothing. And what kind of way is that to set out on a human lifetime experience? Knowing nothing and having no assurance of anything, right up to the day we draw our last breath. So, sorry if anyone disagrees with me, but for me, non-existence, oblivion is a pretty good deal. That's the way I feel about it. So we'll see what people think of that. As ever, I welcome the feedback. Speaking of which, I've got a few correspondences here that I want to read out. And there's a couple that I replied to when they emailed these into me. So I'll read out my responses in those cases as well. So it's great to see that these videos are generating so much discussion and debate. I don't think there's that many places out there which really go to town on these subjects as deeply as I'm doing over here. So it's a good use of a human life, I feel. So it's a good use of time and resources, I feel. And it's a benefit clearly to many people who watch these. So the first one says, I have always felt I don't belong here since around 4 years old. One day I looked up at the sky when I lay on the grass in the garden, and I felt a deep sense of utter despair, a kind of knowing sense rippling through me that this place feels so wrong and that I don't belong here at all. All through my life, I've also felt that there is an ultimate God and a realm which far exceeds this satanic horror show, and I'm looking forward to going there. I would definitely not be returning here. And I would simply say, that's the spirit. Excuse the pun. Next one. I totally agree with you on the malevolence aspect. I drank ayahuasca in November 2021 for this very reason. I felt something was missing, and I was going around in circles trying to heal myself from depression and such. I had asked the medicine to show me unconditional love, and here I am 4 years later, fighting for my life and sanity, $100,000 in debt, heartbroken by a narcissist, and been fighting full-blown demonic possession for the last year. That's good, isn't it? You ask a plant medicine teacher the meaning of unconditional love, and you reap a whole load of shit in your life. Something poetic about that. Continuing, with regards to the soul trap, I 100% agree that we are stuck here looping. I had a choice to leave during my ceremony, and I could sense what death is like. Pure relief from this human condition and heaviness. But I recall saying, I'm not done. I can't leave my dogs or my parents behind. The kicker here is guilt. I think when we leave these bodies, and whatever deception pops up at that point, they use guilt to manipulate us back into the system. You have more karma, or your family needs you, and so on, which is all BS and a further deception. And it may well be. Imagine having the choice to leave this dense 3D physical reality and to go somewhere where none of this heaviness exists, but choosing to come back here instead. The guilt persuasion factor runs very deep, it would seem. And it just becomes so important to dump all of that, to live guilt-free, not take any of those attachments with you when you leave this place, and not to allow that stuff to be used against you and for you to be gaslit into coming back. You've got to exit guilt-free. Remind yourself that you didn't ask to be here, you were tricked or trapped, and that you do not consent in any way to coming back. And no amount of guilt-tripping or gaslighting or deception is going to override that cast iron sense of commitment. That's my say. Next one. I continue to enjoy your God series. Right from the beginning, you addressed many issues that I have struggled with for decades. And your recent discussion of the need to eliminate waste from our digestive process made me laugh and reminded me of a joke. How intelligent is a design that places the entertainment centre right next to the sewage disposal system? Good point, right? Although it probably sounds arrogant, I reached the conclusion that even I could have done a better job designing this place than our so-called loving, benevolent God. After all, what is loving and benevolent about a design that requires life to live on life, that something must die for something else to live, even plants? Actually, when I was in my teens, it seems that I did have a grasp on how batshit crazy everything was, but I fell asleep for about 30 years. Then I received a shaktipat and my world turned upside down. There, they had a tradition of something called Siddhaloka, a place where siddhas, enlightened beings, went after they left their body to spend eternity as being, consciousness, and bliss. When I tried to picture this, I saw them looking at each other and asking, are we having fun yet? I don't think source consciousness, the ground of being, learns or needs to learn anything from our experience. I think things are put in motion and it experiences itself through its creation, but is unaffected by what happens. In the end, it's just a grand cosmic play. And unfortunately, we're trapped in a pretty horrific scene. To me, the goal of a human life is to transcend the body, mind, and ego, remember who we are, and get the hell, excuse the pun, out of here. Yep, I'm pretty much in alignment with all of that. So here's a couple where I replied by email to the senders, and I'll read out my responses here as well. If reality is the perfection, and it is encoded in words and numbers, it would appear to be important to refrain from expressing anything negative. The words will affect our future reality in the next second, hour, and years. Expressing the negativity of this world will perpetuate its reality. Therefore, express only the positive. Some may call it prayer. All words and thoughts should be like that, and it will eventually become real. Your continuing attempts to understand and explain the current state of the world and focusing on 9/11, conspiracies and such will eventually only drag you, us, me, all of us back into it. Even writing this would do it to me. I would encourage people to express a completely positive vision of the present. So my reply to that was, it's difficult, if not impossible, to know how to refrain from acknowledging the negatives. Reminders of the woeful state of affairs in this hellish realm are around us every day, some more than others through their individual personal circumstances. Blocking all that out and only focusing on nice, positive thoughts is just not practical. Can someone in intense pain from cancer every day simply ignore it and meditate it away? If this means we are doomed in a self-perpetuating loop, then it seems that is our inevitable fate for as long as we find ourselves entombed in flesh in this place, whatever it is. As ever, the blame for this falls not upon any of us, but upon the sickening abomination which created this place and dumped us in it. So never get mad at the messenger, get mad at the one that caused the situation in the first place. All the messenger is trying to do is help and in some way gain some sanity and some perspective on the situation. Okay, the next piece of correspondence. I think we can infer that there is a good deity apart from the evil demiurge because what the ancients called signatures exist. It is possible for us to develop art and science that make our lives better. This is not something a purely evil deity could have avoided. I know that the concept of signature is complex and must be clarified, but the argument, I believe, is quite clear. And my reply to that one, I think what you've outlined supports the view that we are divine sparks, aspects of the one true creator source, and that we have somehow been tricked or trapped into incarnating in this place by the sick demiurge which created it. Our capacity for art and science represents us harking back to our true essence. It's an aspect of ourselves which could not be truly destroyed or subverted by the demiurge. Instead, it seeks to parasite off our creative abilities, maybe even down to tricking or coercing us into creating this hell world that we're all experiencing through our pooled collective consciousness. Maybe. So one more to read out. The floating city idea, I think we explored this in a previous volume in this series, was also in Swift's Gulliver's Travels, published in 1726. Swift knew a thing or two about this place. Yeah, the synchronicities have been off the charts for me, music and lyrics particularly hitting the spot. And I'll just interject quickly here. The so-called synchronicities and coincidences have been absolutely ridiculous for me, particularly since I've started doing this series. Numbers everywhere corresponding. I see it most when I'm out driving. I can have a thought. I can think of a person that I know, and a lorry will go past with that person's name on, right at the point that I'm thinking of them. Or I will be thinking of a date when an event is happening, and I'll just think to glance at the clock, and the clock will be expressing that date. And this is happening all the time, every day, all through the day. It's just insane. Back to the email. As for preemptive programming, the seemingly impossible number and degree of accuracy involved cannot be coincidence. The chances are trillions to 1. What with 9/11, COVID, The Simpsons, Orwell's 1984, the old security drill routine, hired actors, and recently the incredible similarities between the false flag that was the Charlie Kirk shooting and the 1998 film Snake Eyes, just does not compute. So we have to conclude that everything happens for a reason, no matter how far-fetched the explanation might be or might seem to be. All of this is impossible for a bunch of evil fuckwits sitting around in a smoking room and planning it all out on charts. It has to be something supernatural. And that's what I've been saying for a very long time. That's how I now feel about predictive programming in movies and music and TV shows and such. I used to think it was intricate human planning. There is still going to be an aspect of that involved. There are going to be evil fuckwits sitting around saying, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do that. But there comes a point where you cross a line and it's there that supernatural paranormal forces start to intervene to cause events to play out in the way that they do. It's what I call matrix coding. It's all down to the computer style coding with which this program that we're living in was created. All right, that's it for now. I hope there's been a few talking points there, and keep that correspondence coming in. If you want to email me, it's markdevlin2022@protonmail.com, or you can drop a comment in the chat section below this video, wherever you happen to be watching it. I do look at all the comments. I reply to as many as I can, and if they're good, I read them out in a future edition of these videos. So that's it for now. Cheers. See you soon.